because as Christian organizations and churches, we have grace and we have justice, like with kind of sharing with what's happened now, but how do we balance justice and grace as we handle these types of situations?
Yeah, Jake, I'll touch on this just because I've had 2 calls on this topic just in the last week with different ministries. So fraud happened, now what? Or you suspect it. Number one, you need to communicate it to who needs to know, which would always include the highest level of executive leadership, assuming it's not the executive leader that's involved in the suspected fraud. But you would need to notify the boards, the audit committee, finance committee. At that point, those leaders, executive and governance, need to decide at that point some very timely and important decisions. Probably we should contact our legal counsel, especially assuming the dollar amounts could be significant. If it's $500, not that it's not wrong, but that's one scenario. It's another when you're suspecting it might be $100,000 that's lost here. So I would recommend you contact legal counsel for your ministry, include them in discussions with the board and executive leadership, and then begin to ask some questions of what's a worst case scenario here with this suspected individual? Because you can't actually kind of create a worst case scenario. I'll tell you what the worst case scenario is. It's the individual that's been at the organization for years and years and years, highly trusted, all kinds of access to the ministry's assets. And so that's a worst case scenario. If it's someone that's only been there 6 months and they only had a ministry credit card, you can actually really quickly begin to narrow down where the focal point of any internal investigation might be, or et cetera. So contact those who need to know, board executives, contact legal counsel if you're suspecting this could be significant. You'll have to consider, do we go a path of pressing charges? And I'll tell you one case for that, and I know there can be different theological perspectives on that when it involves members of a church, perhaps, or. But if you don't, there is the risk of an individual that commits fraud at one ministry, they get terminated, and then they're hired a couple weeks later by another ministry, and they might be tempted to do the same thing. So this article that is at the link on the screen actually talks through a long list of questions to consider on next steps when fraud happens. You want to handle it swiftly, decisively, with the people that need to know. You don't want to be flippant in your communications, because there also can be risks too. Fraud is a legally loaded term, so you don't want to defame someone's character when it's only at the suspicion level and there's not a judge or jury involved on a guilt or innocence decision. So important topics in that article that speak to that.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more finance, governance, and fundraising news and insights for your church or ministry.